I am here today to talk about delegation and the New Hampshire Board of Nursing's feelings regarding how that is managed, how liability associated with that, and just to hopefully answer a few questions people have regarding it. So first, delegation in general. The New Hampshire Board of Nursing does not have a list of can and cannot be delegated, whether it's medications, tasks, anything like that. Instead, we like nurses to think in terms of a process. When things are being delegated, first you have to look at the client. Are they stable? We've had lots of questions regarding what is stability. The easiest way to think about this is think in terms of first, is this new for the individual? So if it's a new diagnosis, whether it's seizures or severe asthma, anything like that, you want to make sure they have a consistent course to their medical treatment before they can be considered stable. From there, you need to do ongoing assessments regarding have they had to recently have to call 911 for emergency interventions? Have they recently been hospitalized to receive care? If they have, then they may be unstable temporarily and they'll stabilize later on. So once you've answered those questions, then you have to ask, how do I determine if I can delegate a task? So you have the 5 rights of delegation that all nurses are held to. So you have to make sure it's the right task, it's the right individual, everything like that. But the piece is communication. Communication is critical. And it's not just verbal communication, but it's also written communication because people need to understand things through more than one medium. So if you're about to delegate to an individual, whether it's a para, a parent, a coach, you as an RN need to evaluate what that person heard and their willingness. This is very critical from a liability perspective and from a responsibility perspective. So I'll just kind of go down the road of, for instance, if someone has seizures, how that would be managed. So if I have a student that has seizures, the first I want to know is what kind of medications are they on? What type of seizures? How long do the seizures last? What are their post-ictal and when do they wake up? How do they wake up? If they have seizures more than once, they're consistent, they're the same way, then they're considered stable. So at that point, you can write down the key elements in a care plan for that student. Make sure you review it with the parents. Are they in agreement? When do we call 911? When are we concerned? If you have a clear plan, then you can communicate that to paraprofessionals or a coach or anyone else that's really helping to oversee their care outside of the school setting where you're at the time. If a medication has to be given or an intervention has to be given, it's also important that as a nurse, you have to evaluate how did that go and document if there's any opportunities, re-educate if there's any kind of questions or concerns. So in that instance, you would talk to the student, how they feel. Talk to the parent. What's their perception regarding how it was managed? Did they feel like their child was safe? And then talk to the person that was delegated to and find out, do they still feel comfortable accepting this delegated task? That's really critical because as nurses, we can't make someone accept a delegation from us. So we have to make sure they're willing to accept that delegation. If it went well, we can continue with the delegated task as was. If it didn't, then we need to reassess, do we need additional training? Do we need to find someone different to delegate to? So there are different options, but we have to explore that. So another question that comes to us is, where's our liability as a nurse? If we delegate and it goes wrong, is it going to be against my license? Am I going to be reported to the Board of Nursing? If you evaluate that individual and they accept responsibility, then you will not be held liable. If an evaluation does not occur, that's when we get into trouble because the question becomes, how do we know they were competent? How do we know that they're capable? So that's the piece that, caught in the details of everything is easy to forget, but it's very important that we do. The other piece regarding delegation is know that if anything changes with the client or with the person you're delegating to, as a nurse, we can remove delegation rights. So if we all of a sudden find out that someone didn't handle a situation as we'd like, we think the safety of the client could be at jeopardy, we can actually remove that delegation responsibility and find a different plan. The other element to be aware of is only I can delegate as a nurse. So if this school year I'm the nurse, next school year it's someone else, that new school nurse needs to validate everyone I'm delegating to. You can't go off of a previous assessment and evaluation plan. In sum, just to review the 5 rights of delegation. First, we must verify that it's the right task. And this means that as a nurse, you must have the authority to delegate that task. Second, the right circumstance. So make sure your client continues to be stable, which means they haven't had to have emergency calls, recent 911, anything like that. Third is the right person, and this means the person receiving the delegation must continue to accept that delegation and show competency. Fourth is communication. So make sure that it's verbally and in writing what needs to be done and what's expected and when to escalate that to 911 or communicating to the parents. And finally, the right supervision and evaluation are key to make sure your client remains safe. For further assistance, as far as questions you might have, the Board of Nursing really requires, think about your 5 rights. If you look at the 5 rights, have the documentation that supports that, then the Board of Nursing will support you and it reduces your liability. As far as additional questions, contact your local groups as far as fellow school nurses for mentoring, because a lot of it can be situational and how you apply scenarios you're experiencing in your workplace.